Good morning, and thank you all for attending and joining together in this fight against hate. I first want to take a minute to thank Laura and Mark for their leadership in putting this summit together again this year. Your commitment is unwavering. I also want to acknowledge all of the people behind the scenes, and you know who you are, for your endless days and sleepless nights to truly make this all happen. Thank you. My name is Michelle Rosenthal, and I am the proud daughter of Joy and Ellie Rosenthal. My career began in politics and government and then transitioned to sports when I worked for the Pittsburgh Steelers in community relations. I then started my own consulting business, which has allowed me to continue to work with athletes in sports. On October 27th, 2018, my brothers, Cecil and David Rosenthal, were murdered at the Tree of Life Synagogue. My community relations experience has taught me how impactful the platform of sports can be to reach, connect, and affect positive change. For that reason, I am honored to moderate this panel today. Last year, I stood on the stage and welcomed all of you. I met so many amazing people who all share a common bond. One of those individuals was United Nations Special Advisor on the Prevention of Genocide, Alice Nderitu. Following the summit last year, the Special Advisor reached out to summit leadership to propose that the United Nations and the summit team together to create a working group to craft a plan of action for sports organizations and fans to reduce hate speech. This group has met over the past few months and met in person yesterday afternoon, and we would like to share some of our dialogue on best practices and the work being done. As we continue this discussion, I ask each of you to introduce yourselves and your role and affiliation. Alice, why is the United Nations strategy and plan of action on hate speech something you wanted to bring to the summit?
Thank you, Michelle, and thank you everyone again for being here. My name is Alice Nderitu. I am the Special Advisor to the Secretary General on the Prevention of Genocide, and I am an Under Secretary General. And I'm here because for many reasons, including that in 2019, the Secretary General launched the UN Plan and Strategy for Hate Speech and mandated my office to lead efforts globally on the prevention on countering hate speech. And this is extremely important. Eradicating hate speaks directly into the mandate that I have on countering hate speech. And of course, we do know that hate speech is one of the key risk factors for genocides. And when I say genocides, I include all the legally recognized genocides, including the Holocaust. Thank you.
Anna, the work at the league level involves so many issues affecting our society. How do you decide what is most important, and can you share some examples with us?
Sure, thanks, Michelle. Hi, everyone. I'm Anna Isaacson. I head up social responsibility for the NFL. And as you might imagine, being at the NFL, we have the good fortune to have a very broad fan base, and a very broad fan base spanning the entire country who are leaning on us to do good. And I always say that we have a responsibility to give back to all the communities that give of themselves to us, right? We would be nothing if not for the support of our fans. And so it's incumbent upon us as leaders and as one of the few cultural institutions left in this country to use our platform for good. And so it is challenging sometimes to know what to take on and how to say no when every cause is relevant and pressing and urgent and critical. But we look for a few things. We look to say what is really resonating in our 32 communities and across the country. What is relevant and most pressing to our clubs, and really what is most pressing to our players and our player population. and how can we make change? How can the NFL use our status and our platform to make real positive change? And so that goes into the decision making on what we take on. I love to say that all of the things that we do are really planned and strategic and proactive. Unfortunately, over the last 8 years, I would say we have become much more reactive to what's going on around the nation and to various issues that we find ourselves in. And so that, because anything from domestic violence and sexual violence to social justice, which is where we are investing the majority of our time and energy and resources, and have been over the last couple of years, and I think we'll continue to do so. But just naming just a few, it's very hard to say no, and we try to say, okay, how can the NFL use the shield and use our clubs to give back in various different ways? It may not look the same across a cause, but we know that we have an opportunity in places like Pittsburgh and around the country, especially during our season when people are watching and listening. And so it is really important for us to pick wisely.
Thank you. David, the Fenway Sports Group is a global company, that includes the Red Sox, the Pittsburgh Penguins, the Liverpool Soccer Club in England, and a NASCAR racing team. How do your different teams view these issues regarding hate speech, and are there similarities and differences in the challenges you face for these different teams?
Thank you, Michelle, and thank you for your courage and for leading this group today. I'm Dave Friedman from Fenway Sports Group, Executive Vice President of Legal and Government Affairs for the Boston Red Sox. I grew up in New York as a Yankee fan, so I know that hatred can be overcome. And your question is a good one. I think for each of our teams, this is a compelling topic that we're eager to be part of this working group, and with Alice's leadership and Laura's help. For the Red Sox, in 2017, we had a very public, disturbing incident in which an opposing player was called the N-word on the field. And since 2017, we've worked really hard and thought a lot about how to deal with hate directed at players, our employees, fans, and the like, and so it's been a big deal for us. For our colleagues from Pittsburgh, and I'm joined, by the way, with a bunch of my teammates from the Red Sox. We have Sarah McKenna, Becca Salwasser, Zeynep Curran, and Michael Lara. And from the Penguins today, Tracy McCants-Lewis and Delvina Morrow. And for the Penguins, of course, hockey teams have a different racial makeup from baseball teams typically, but they face similar concerns. How do you make sure that every employee, every person of color and woman feels comfortable at hockey games? How do you make sure that youth hockey games have a setting where people of color, kids of color, feel welcome on the ice? So for them, that's an important, similar challenge. For our NASCAR team, it's a bit of a tougher space to crack, but I'll tell you that our NASCAR team, the Roush Fenway Keselowski team, was very heartened a couple years ago when NASCAR banned the Confederate flag. And they didn't know what was the fan reaction going to be. And it turns out that across the board, fans of all colors recognized, for the most part, that that was the right thing to do. Obviously, some pushback, not everyone's happy. But I think based on that experience, the NASCAR teams and the league are interested in joining with us and working with us and how to promote messages of respect and love and those sorts of things. And then across in Liverpool, there's no question that there's a lot of hate speech, unfortunately, in England. Our colleagues and teammates there talked especially about the problem on social media, which is a problem that we have here as well. But some of their players have faced a ton of hatred on social media platforms. The platforms like Facebook and Twitter and Instagram become almost a cesspool for these players. So what can be done about that? Obviously, as Anna alluded to, I think that the solutions and strategies will need to be tailored for each team and geographic area and for the personalities, what's comfortable, but we also have to push each other out of our comfort zones to try to address this issue.
Thank you. Lauren, we know that Twitter is doing a lot with sports organizations. Can you share with us how you envision this being folded in to this global initiative?
And thanks for the question, and it's great to be here. I'm Lauren Culbertson-Greco. I'm head of U.S. Public Policy at Twitter. So thank you again for including us and including myself in this working group. We really at Twitter try to address the issues that plague our society and happen on our service through three buckets. One being product, the other being policy, and the third being partnerships. And policies, of course, are very important. We work to get it right, to ensure that we have the proper policies in place to prevent threats of harm, a lot of the types of content that you're all referring to, and making sure that we're enforcing that. And of course, we have product interventions in place. For example, safety mode is a really great new feature you can use to help with some of the issues. But what this working group is about is really partnerships. And Twitter is a tool that can be used for bad, it can be used for good. And what we want to do is to try to leverage the power of Twitter and our Twitter for Good programming to really uplift the voices that are combating the racism and the hate that we're seeing. And so I'm really excited for the possibilities that can come from this working group we just joined. But thanks for having me here and looking forward to the discussion.
Thank you. Derek, in your conversations with athletes, what types of tools and skills do they say are important for being able to communicate about anti-hate and anti-hate messaging?
Thank you, Michelle, and thank you to the organizers as well for inviting me. My name is Derek Silva. I'm an associate professor at King's University College and affiliated at Carleton University. And much of my work, I'm a criminologist of sport and terrorism, and much of my work is speaking with athletes about harms and injustice in the world and about how they experience sometimes harmful things on places like social media. We've talked about things like a cesspool or places on the online space where athletes really get attacked often. And what they've articulated to me is that they need some tools, some standard tools and a skill set in order to mobilize and be able to deal with this when it happens. And many athletes feel uncomfortable going to a place like social media, even though they have massive platforms. Even though we're seeing professional athletes, they have some of the largest platforms that exist in terms of people that they can attract, and when they send a tweet or post something on Instagram, they have these platforms, but it's the education around how they can use that and how they can use tech and how they can mobilize their platforms to actually counter these messages. So part of the issue is getting, I keep using the analogy of a playbook, is getting a single playbook, which I think this working group has the potential to provide. A single kind of playbook for attacking or countering hate in these online spaces. And increasingly, sadly, it happens on the field as well. And when something happens, like we saw recently with Rachel Richardson, a volleyball player at Duke University, who was the target of racist attacks at BYU, what lessons for people like Rachel to actually be able to mobilize her network of support and to be able to talk about these things on social media without the pile-on that happens after the fact, without the sort of gang mentality that you see in the comment section or in the retweets. How do we actually translate those skills to athletes? And I think we have to do that increasingly at an early stage in their career, where they're building their career. And we have to remember that these athletes are often working 120, 150 hours a week on their craft. They're professional athletes or seeking to be professional athletes, be the best. They don't have necessarily the same amount of time to be worried about eradicating hate or counter messaging. So having experts and having a dialogue with athletes and people, organizations, teams, and leaders in tech, all at the table to provide that playbook, I think is exactly what we need. So yeah, I'll leave it there.
Thank you. Nile, Meta is already involved in a lot of this work and also developing new technologies that none of us have seen that could be effective in helping the sports world on these issues against hate speech. Tell us about what you have done and what you see on the horizon.
Thank you, Michelle. And hello, everyone. My name is Nilay Erdem. I'm joining from Meta. I'm from Meta's content policy team. And the specific work that I do is to consult with, talk to, engage with academic experts as well as civil society when we are developing our community standards, when we are iterating on our policies related to hate speech, bullying and harassment, and everything that our community standards covers. And actually, it's really good that we heard from Derek as well about the tool. So I would love to talk a little bit about what we are doing, as you mentioned, Michelle, in this area. Our platforms like Twitter, but also like social media in general, is overwhelmingly used for celebrating and supporting these athletes, for professionals as well as amateur sportsmen to reach to their audiences and to share positive stories. But of course, it also mirrors the society. So we also see people abusing to attack these athletes, especially around big events like big World Cup or other cups or other sports events. So our work around safety is really never done. We work really hard to make sure that the athletes feel safe. Our policies in this area covers different aspects of hate speech. So our policies, our community standards has a quite detailed definition of hate speech. So we cover attacks related to violent attacks, dehumanizing comparisons, as well as things like calls for exclusion, for example, on people or groups of people related to who they are. This could be related to race, nation, gender, sexual orientation, caste, so many different areas. And we constantly reiterate about our policies, because hate speech is really, as you all know, is really an area where it can be in various different forms. So to give you an example, I come from the UK. One of the things is, for example, emojis and how people use emojis, which can actually by themselves be really benign, like a banana emoji, for example, which we saw a lot in the UK to be used to attack some of the players. So it's really hard to detect when it's used in the context of hate, when something this benign is used in this context. But we make sure that our policies also cover these types of things, also visual hate, hate in the forms of memes, which again we see in the area of sports as well. So that's the policy side. And then we also work hard to detect this content, to make sure that we have our proactive tools, but also reporting tools to detect this content as well, because we want to make sure that we remove this content before anyone sees it. And then, in addition to the work that we do to remove this content, there is also the tools, as Derek mentioned, that you need to provide to the athletes to make sure that they know what to do when something like this happens. And we worked a lot also in the UK in relation to this area. And I can give you some examples of the tools that we have. For example, we have something called hidden comments, which athletes and creators, people in general, can use to identify certain words that would be hidden when it's used in the comment section of them. However, one other thing that we saw through our research and also through consultation with athletes as well as the general sports community and experts as well, is that this type of hate also happens on direct message requests, for example, to the athletes. So what we did as a result of this is to also add a hidden comments function for these direct message requests as well. Another thing that we saw through consultations with athletes as well as through our own research is that some of the attacks, a lot of the attacks happens through by people who actually don't follow these athletes on Instagram, for example, or people who recently follow them. In the moment, they sort of share this. So one other tool we provided as a result of this is to give athletes a chance to say, okay, I don't want to see any comments or direct message requests from the people who followed me in the last week or so, for example, or people who don't follow me. So there are these types of tools, but I think what is really important, as Derek mentioned, is to make sure that athletes are aware of these tools and it's easy to use as well. So in order to help athletes become aware and become educated about these tools, we do lots of trainings, working together with teams, working together with with the sports community. And we recently also brought a safety school, which is a webinar that is specifically created for these creators to learn about the security tools, safety tools, because it is really incredibly important that they know, one thing is we develop them, but what's really important is that they are aware of it. And the last thing, which Laura also mentioned, is partnerships, because we can't do this job alone. So we work closely with NGOs working in this area, as well as different teams around the world. To give you an example from UK again, we recently worked with an NGO called Kick It Out. They work on racism against sports, and we started this campaign that is specifically focused on fans, because fans is also really important in making sure that they have the kits that they need to know what to do when they become evidence of these issues. So we created this program where they can receive these anti-discrimination kits and trainings as well to know what to do in this area. And of course, we work with law enforcement when these issues become more serious to make sure that we provide the necessary information to the law enforcement agencies. So there is a lot to do. And maybe one thing to add on the working group is I'm really excited to be a part of this working group, because as I said, this is not something that we can do by ourselves. And because of my role at Meta, I truly believe in working with experts and working with the community to make things better. So I'm really excited to be a part of this working group.
Really, thank you. Oren, you spend a lot of time in spaces where hate and extremism spread. What should sports leagues be mindful of when considering messaging to counter hate and extremism?
So thank you, Michelle. And I am a power forward for the New York Knicks. That's why I'm here. Okay, fine. I am the vice president of the Center on Extremism at ADL. And I am here not only because of indefatigable Laura, but honestly, Michelle, I'm here because you are here. So ADL's been involved in combating extremism and hate for over 100 years, but in this sort of sporting environment, ADL has launched, for example, a sports leadership council with the fundamental recognition that some of the things that are bringing people together to either engage in sports or be fans of sports are the things that can actually counteract some of the messages of hate and extremism that we're seeing. Right? It's about bringing people together, being on a team, feeling like you belong to something. Right? Those are all really, really important and are often not what those who are carrying out, evil acts, if you will, are feeling. And so I'm actually on this working group because I think when we're talking about messaging specifically and the power of some of the organizations that we have here, and the power of the UN, for example, we have to be realistic in terms of what these messages are competing against, right? Extremists and those who are adjacent to extremists and those who are promoting hate are spending a lot of time in a lot of diverse spaces online. This is where they're trying to campaign and win hearts and minds, often leveraging what is the public talking about, right? So it doesn't always have to be an election. Right? It often actually is the sporting events that we are spending so much time investing in. And they're trying to exploit those moments in online spaces in order to bring their hate. Or in other cases, they are actually bringing themselves increasingly to some of these events, right? To try to, essentially confront people as they're going into these sporting events. So there's a wide range of ways in which extremists are going to try to leverage the popularity and how meaningful sports is in our society. And online in particular, extremists and those who promote hate of all kind are creating online experiences that frankly are really compelling, right? I kind of hate to say this, but in terms of branding and messaging and attracting people to their cause, as hateful as it is, right? They have entire social media networks. They are using multiple social media networks. And as important as it is, right, to have leaders in industry speak out and create campaigns, and it really is important. We also have to understand where some of this hate and extremism is incubated and find ways to leverage the beauty, the diversity, the meaning of sports to unite people and put it in those spaces as well. So that's one of the things the working group has talked about. I also want to say that, we've all talked about in this working group the idea that messaging is not necessarily going to be enough, right? You can't just tell somebody, don't be a hater. You can express why it's problematic. You can be an ally and support others who are going through it. But at the end of the day, you also have to provide people some actions that they could sink their teeth into, right? Something, an alternative for them to do. Maybe using their skills that they're using for bad purposes to use those for something positive. And so again, we are leveraging at ADL sort of how we understand and what we're seeing in the extremist spaces, what their plans are, how they're winning hearts and minds, and hopefully, as this working group develops serious strategies, we'll be able to make sure that we are, attacking the issue from all angles, not just in terms of athletes themselves, fan behavior, but how do you win the hearts and minds of those people that frankly, secretly, often, actually want to become part of a community that is represented up here.
Thank you. Alice, you have rolled out this plan of action against hate with religious leaders over the past couple years. Can you just talk about that process?
Yes, thank you, Michelle. We began 5 years ago a process to put together a plan of action for religious leaders and actors, and this one was specifically on preventing violence that could lead to atrocity crimes, that is genocide, war crimes, crimes against humanity. And it's a worldwide plan, and we took it to all the continents, and today it's a very practical tool. It speaks to specific actions that can be used by religious leaders to counter violence, to prevent violence, speaks to specific actions that can be used to strengthen what is already existing, specific actions that can be used to build where there doesn't exist anything. And I know Mubin Sheikh is here because we met yesterday. Mubin Sheikh, wherever you are, he was one of, in the team of drafters and in the team of implementers. And when you look at the languages we've translated it to, then you can follow the path of where it's gone throughout the world. And so we have it in Serbo-Croat. It began in English. Now we have it in Serbo-Croat. We have it in Hindu. We have it in Arabic. We have it in very many languages. And now we are translating it to Kiswahili, Russian, Chinese. It's moving to those levels. And it's a very practical tool, but also the relationships that we created on the path are very practical. So like, for example, some of the things that we do on a daily basis is we receive calls like from Iraq with what's going on there, the unrest, the imams asking how can we ship messages, and then we help them craft those messages. We've had meetings and continue to do so. We got this plan has endorsement even from the Pope. So the Vatican reaches out and asks, we are drafting a pastoral letter to the whole world, and what is it that you think we need to say? So we inform a lot of behind the scenes policy making and a lot of thinking. And so thinking about the power of sports and what then that can do, because we've seen religious leaders come together, and how powerful sports is, and how sports is able to unite in so many ways, and sometimes for brief periods, like during the World Cup, when a secret that we often say as peace builders is that we get the most work done during the World Cup, because then everybody is able to speak one language, the language of sports, and how much we can do, and we've been able to do, for example, in India between Muslims and Christians, in various spaces around the world. So just thinking about sports, and of course the partnership with the tech and social media companies with whom we have a very close relationship as well. We have this Chatham House roundtables every so often on issues to do with hate. But thinking about how we can leverage the power of sport, because it is there. It is a space that provides us with very practical things that we can do. Sports role models looked up to everywhere, regardless of who they are. We look up to them. And beyond looking up to them, we do know that in terms of the organizing of sports and what teams become, because teams actually become a community that's stronger than ethnicity and race or religion, what then we can do. So very many practical things that we can do. And just thinking about this and watching the journey of how we've worked with these ideas since we began speaking about this, because since Eradicate Hate Summit ended last year, we've had this ongoing conversation, and now we are getting to the point of we do need to put together, and already there's a draft of this plan of action for countering hate and through sports, and we would like to launch it. The Secretary General would like to launch it at the United Nations on December 9th, which is a very unique day because that's the day we commemorate the signing of the first ever human rights treaty that was signed by the world, by the UN, which is the Convention on the Prevention and Punishment of the Crime of Genocide. So just thinking about what we can do, because we've seen it practically happen with religious leaders, and we keep seeing it every day, and we are documenting that to put out, is a journey that we would invite all of you to walk with us on. Thank you.
Thank you. Anna, why was this, can you talk a little bit about why this UN Summit working group is important to the NFL?
Sure. I mean, it's important for many reasons, but we've been on a journey to fight hate and end racism for some time now. I think a lot of what we did many years ago was probably more not labeled, right? We didn't call it that, but we were always sort of working towards helping underserved communities and fighting for equal rights. And as I mentioned earlier, we found ourselves in a situation in 2016 and 2017 where many of our players were taking a stand on social justice issues, and they were speaking up and using their platform. And while this was challenging for the NFL in many ways, what we did decide to do was to listen to those players and let them take the lead and collaborate with them and talk to our teams and our owners about the importance of stopping hate and ending racism and trying to fight injustices. And so we launched a campaign called Inspire Change. It is all about breaking down barriers to opportunity. It's rooted in how systemic racism has impacted so many of the structures in our society. And it is turned into our biggest initiative. It operates 365 days a year. And I think it shows who we are, who our players are, who we want to be, and how we can encourage people to inspire change. And it comes to life in different ways, depending on the market, depending on the players. We saw one really unbelievable execution that just came out of a horrific situation in Buffalo, where one of our club markets, and after the shooting there, the players and the legends and the team came together to choose love. And we talked a little bit about this yesterday, about how you can be positive with your messaging rather than negative. You can inspire change, you can choose love, you can choose the positive, and have communities and people come together and to learn from what has happened in these communities and to make things better. And what we have the ability to do at the NFL, which is awesome, is take something like that, the Bills starting a Choose Love campaign, selling Choose Love t-shirts to all their fans, mobilizing their community. We then, to kick off the NFL season, when we knew a lot of eyeballs would be on the NFL, and the Bills happened to be playing in that national home opener kickoff game in Los Angeles, we started our entire season around this theme of choosing love. And we built love sculptures actually in LA and in Buffalo, and trying to draw in our fans and the people around the country around this notion of ending hate and fighting racism and choosing love over all of that. And that's just one example of kind of how the work has come to life, and why I think it's important to be here and to share that. I think we all up here know that the power of sports to move people and to change lives. And so I think the more that we can continue to do those campaigns and execute on these moments and bring light to these situations, I think will help, because we know young people are looking at us. They're following what we do. They're taking our lead. And so, we will continue with the Bills and with the other clubs around the country to do work just like this.
Thank you. David, the sports working group has come together to draft proposed policies and best practices and to share those with the UN. Can you talk about the role and importance of a company's corporate culture when it comes to putting those policies into action?
Absolutely. I mean, I mentioned this incident that we had in 2017. So an opposing player in the outfield was called the N-word. And it's extremely important to have the right policies in place to make it clear to your fans when they come in the gate that they're not allowed to use hate speech, for your own employees to have very clear reporting mechanisms to encourage and in some cases require them to come forward when they learn about stuff. So all the written stuff is really important. As a lawyer, I appreciate that. But I think the culture is really important too. It's not just what you say, but how and how often do you say it. And I think that one of the things that my colleagues and I learned in 2017 and since is, it's easy enough to say a couple of words like, okay, you're not allowed to use hate speech. But we had a choice in 2017. We could have said the right thing for a day. It would have been a media cycle. You say all the right things, you turn the page, you go back to business as usual. And a lot of people would have probably done that. But we said, when we were encouraged, by the way, by the local NAACP leader, by the mayor of Boston, by others, you can use this moment to really dive in and take a deeper look and see, if there's more you can do to take the lead. So take the lead became the mantra of this big initiative that we put together, which was mostly inward facing. It wasn't just telling other people how to live their lives, but what are we doing internally to make sure that we're being inclusive and have belonging? And I think that is partly corporate culture. Does your leadership, your ownership, your CEO say over and over again, this matters in a way that people take to heart? And one example, the first time you ask employees, especially let's say a security guard who's a person of color, do you encounter harassment or racism? A lot of times that person might hesitate. I don't really want to bring it up. I haven't been physically struck, and I've had to put up with this for a long time, and nothing's really going to change. And their supervisors have this sort of same view, like, I don't want to start reporting this now. What am I really going to do? But if you say a few times, we really do want to hear this. This is important to us. This is part of our culture. Come forward. Then the stories flood out. You've seen that with Me Too. You've seen it with post-George Floyd. So I think that culture is really important. Now, how do we all be part of that? And there's no playbook for that, I don't think. But hopefully the working group creates that kind of buoyed up leadership. I mean, I'm inspired by the Pittsburgh example, and Michelle, what you and people here have done. And I think that some of coming together and doing this online and in person can hopefully help build that culture.
Thank you. Derek, what are athletes telling you about their desire to participate in anti-hate education and messaging?
Yeah, I think athletes want to be part of positive, progressive change. They really have articulated to me that particularly since 2020 and the massive, brilliant mobilizations around social and racial justice that we saw in response to George Floyd, we saw athletes taking their platforms to new levels, and that in some ways has really intensified even over the last 2 years or so. So athletes want to be part of it, but we have to be mindful of one of the largest barriers to participating in that messaging for athletes, and that's the risk of what I mentioned earlier in terms of like pile-ons. The moment they come out and say something, often you see online pile-ons that actually re-victimize people in a variety of ways. So we have to be mindful of that and provide the resources, as Dave was saying, at the organizational level. I think organizations really have to to be nimble and flexible and dynamic to be able to like instantly mobilize resources in support of athletes. And I think it's a really challenging thing. It's often organizations, it's really challenging and daunting to do that. But if we can provide the playbook, or if we can provide some guidelines on how organizations and how CEOs can and other leaders can quickly launch support for athletes facing some vitriol online or attacks on their playing surface, then we can go a long way with breaking down that barrier, that sort of fear that something might go wrong. And they want to be part of this. And the example that I used earlier with Rachel Richardson, we saw like a great example of what this actually looks like and how Duke University responded almost immediately to what happened at BYU, releasing statements on social media in support. That goes a long way to tell athletes that like we care as an organization about you, we're here to support you, and that breaks down some of those barriers, some of that fear of entering this space. And I think we need the promise of this working group and the promise of creating strategy is to offer organizations with the structure of what that might look like. And I think that's what everyone at this on this panel really wants and the promise of this working group.
Yeah. Thank you. Oren, with the work that the ADL does, are there any indications that extremists are targeting sports, and how can we prepare?
So extremists never miss an opportunity to exploit, whether it's a crisis or something positive. And so, extremists are indeed looking, how do they leverage, large events with many people to, put their signs and symbols out there, how to, take on a trending hashtag, sports related, and to, glom onto that to spread their message. So that's all the time. But I think there are opportunities to push back against that. And a big area is, when you think about esports, we talk about the importance of, when you go to a sporting event, there's people all around you from different walks of life often. When you're like doing esports, you're dealing with people around the world who are engaging in their, fandom. And so it's even a more sort of ripe community. Extremists are looking to sort of insert themselves into that space, but it's also an opportunity to, make the messages, for example, from this working group or what some of the organizations here have done, and make it more universal at a time where it really, really matters, right? I think even athletes themselves are spending probably more time gaming than they are on the actual fields, on these spaces. I know that they're working on their craft a lot as well, so I take your point from earlier. But, this is a universal, you have billions and billions of users. And so I think it's always about anticipating where are extremists going to try to insert their narratives next and start creating boundaries and, friction for their ability to do that as early as possible. And that's where the proper support for athletes that you've heard comes in. That's where organizations who are, helping protect their athletes comes in. But it's also about reaching out to these new spaces and trying to get ahead of extremists, because we often are coming at this after the fact. But here we have an opportunity, a massive opportunity in esports, for example, to start creating expectations and an atmosphere in which hate and extremism is going to be rejected immediately. And so I just think that's another opportunity. That's how I like to view it.
Thank you. So this is just some individuals. This panel is comprised of just some of the individuals of the working group. I would like to acknowledge, if you guys can stand, the other individuals that are part of the working group, and if we could just acknowledge everybody. If you guys could just stand. No? Thank you. So I feel we can't be complacent in the face of small and large acts of hate, and this working group will continue to reach as many as possible through the platform of sports. So I just want to thank you all for this dialogue.